So that was non-specific response, where it's just kind of a general attack to whatever might be coming into your body. But the immune system likes to have specialized responses, specific responses to different types of germs. Because different germs might have certain weaknesses, and if your body can learn how to fight a very specific type of germ, then it's going to be more effective at fighting that germ. That's like with our squirrel analogy. Like we have the boys with the baseball bats at the door, and they're ready to attack any type of squirrel that comes in the door. But maybe the girls are studying up on the different kinds of squirrels, and they realize flying squirrels, their weakness is boomerangs, so we can throw boomerangs at them, and it's much more effective than baseball bats. And all of a sudden you have a more specific response to a specific type of squirrel. Maybe like red squirrels absolutely hate gummy bears, and so you can throw gummy bears at them or something. I'm getting silly now, but the point is that different germs can be fought with different mechanisms, I'll say. And that's where your immune system wants to create a specific response to germs. Now, here are 4 words that you're going to need to know pertaining to the specific response. So, these words all relate to each other. I'm just giving them to you now so that you can keep your eye out for them. You should know T cells, B cells, antigens, and antibodies. And if you know how those all relate to each other, then you're going to be good on the specific response section of these notes. And this is going to be the most complicated part of this section right here, is the finding the way that the T cells and the B cells work together to create a specific response to germs. So we're going to start by defining the terms antigens and antibodies. You have heard of both of these, I'm pretty sure. At least you've probably heard of antibodies, maybe when you're going to the doctor, or perhaps even in the pandemic you've heard something in the news about antibodies. But an antigen is a part of the pathogen. It's a part of the germ. So it's a recognizable feature of the germ. So in the case of our squirrels, it could be like the bushy tail, or the cute face, or whatever. It's a recognizable feature of that pathogen. So in the real world with germs, they don't have bushy tails, but they might have like a little hair, cilia, flagellum thingy that they use to move around. Like a bacteria sometimes has a tail that they use to swim, and that can be a recognizable part of that bacterium. It could also be something like a protein on the outside of the cell, or whatever. There's all sorts of different kinds of antigens, but they're a recognizable thing. That's the key. It's something that your body could potentially look at and say, oh, this is this kind of germ, so this is how I'm going to fight it. And so the reason I have a frowny face next to the antigen word is because it's a part of the germ. It's part of the bad guy. But an antibody, on the other hand, gets a smiley face because it's part of your immune system. So antibodies are good. Antigens are parts of the germ, so they're not good. An antibody is something that your body can produce that actually attaches to the antigens which are on the pathogen. So it's able to recognize antigens and then stick itself to that, and it causes the pathogens to kind of clump together, and they can't be as evil when they're all clumped together. So, again, to give you the silly squirrel analogy, this would be like, imagine we had specific types of gumdrops that stuck to specific types of squirrels, and we just lined our doors with these gumdrops. So when the squirrels came by, they start getting stuck with all these gumdrops, and then they kind of get all stuck up and they can't come and attack you anymore. Again, silly analogy, but hopefully an effective one. I think it's effective. So, that was antigens and antibodies. Make sure you have those two straight. One is part of the germ, one is a part of your immune system. Okay, now T cells. So, T cells are a type of white blood cell. And what they do is your body has, thousands of different kinds of T cells in it, and they're each looking for a very specific antigen. So, your body just makes tons of them. You might have only a few floating around your body for any given antigen. And once one of these T cells is triggered it notices an antigen that it matches up with, like the piece fits into its puzzle, sort of. It'll identify it, and then it'll start to reproduce rapidly, making more of that specific kind of T cell. So that T cell will make an army of that T cell, which are all designed to fight that, or to recognize that one type of antigen. Now, once they do that, some of the T cells go and destroy infected cells, like cells that have been infected by the virus or the bacteria or whatever it is that's infecting you at the time. The reason they do this, it might sound not very good. That it sounds like, oh, why is your body going and fighting itself? Why is it destroying your cells rather than saving them? And the reason for that is those cells are actually kind of hijacked by, say, a virus, and that virus is reproducing in there. So in order to keep that virus contained, you have to just destroy that entire cell, and you can kind of halt the virus's progress in that case. So some of the T cells go and destroy cells that are infected by the pathogens, but other T cells will go and signal B cells. So T and B, make sure you have those two straight. The T cells recognize the antigen, and they'll reproduce, go destroy some of the infected cells, and then some of them will go and find B cells. Now B cells, and the way I remember this is B cells make antibodies. So they produce antibodies. Notice there's a B in antibodies and a B in B cells, so there's your little memory trick right there. Now you can never forget it. So they produce antibodies. Remember, those are the little gumdrops that stick to the scrolls and make them unable to do evil. So antibodies are these little things produced by your B cells that recognize that antigen that the T cell recognized. So they recognize that antigen on the pathogen, and they go and stick to it, and they cause all the pathogens to clump together, and then all of a sudden they can't be as evil anymore. Now, one note on antibodies, and this is where the immune system gets really cool, is the B cells will produce millions of these antibodies, and most of them will go in, or many of them will go and attack the pathogens. But some of them will stick around in your body. These antibodies are going to just kind of stick around, and they are specific to that one type of germ. So it might be like that one strain of the flu that your antibodies can now fight. And they're just going to stick around in your body for as long as they can, and this way your body will remember how to fight that disease. And that way, if you come into contact with that disease again, your body can just wipe it out without having to go through the whole T cell, B cell process. It can more quickly just attack it with the antibodies, and then it's done. So it goes into like your immune system memory, and this is what immunity is. So this is where we say you get immunity to that disease. So if you've been infected with a certain type of flu, you're not going to get that kind of flu again because you now have an immunity to it, because you have those antibodies sticking around in your system. So this is a diagram from your book, and it's mostly the same, except I think they changed this part right here. It's just a diagram showing how the immune response works. You have a T cell that recognizes an antigen. It makes a bunch of itself. Some of those T cells go and destroy infected cells. Other of those T cells will go and signal B cells, which make antibodies, and those antibodies will go and destroy pathogens. So that is how your body will more specifically fight germs. And in the real world, immunity can get a lot more complicated than this, but this is a good general overview for you to understand how it works. And it's pretty cool stuff. It's amazing that God gave us this to protect us from disease. Okay, so let's talk about immunity here for a little bit. When you have those antibodies in your system, your body remembers how to fight that very specific type of germ, and then you can fight it again. Now, there's two types of immunity that we talk about. We talk about passive immunity and active immunity. And if you think about the difference between the words passive and active, if you're passive, you might be like, sitting on the couch watching TV. But if you're active, you're out running, you're out doing things. And that's the kind of difference between passive and active immunity. With passive immunity, this is where you get antibodies in your system, but you don't have to do any work to get them. You don't have to fight the disease. And this happens primarily through babies getting antibodies through their mother's milk. So they actually kind of, by God's good design, get some of the antibodies from their mom, and then they can fight those diseases without ever having to encounter them on their own. But we don't stay babies drinking milk forever, so we have to learn how to fight diseases on our own. And this is active immunity. So this is where you've received a disease into your system and you have fought it, and all of a sudden your body can fight it all on its own, and you don't have to receive antibodies from anywhere else. Your body makes its own antibodies. That's active immunity, because your body's actually doing the work. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you, if not all of you, have been vaccinated at some point. A vaccine is a way to acquire immunity without having to get very badly sick. So the idea between a vaccine is that the idea behind a vaccine is that if you can give your body the disease in a weakened form, so give it like a weak or dead form of the virus, or a weak or dead form of the bacteria, or whatever it is, then your body can fight those dead versions and learn to identify the antigens and make the antibodies and everything. And then when it encounters the real live version, it'll already have that specific response built up in its immune system memory. And when that happens, you can fight it very quickly without getting sick. And so when you get vaccinated for the flu or for, I don't know, smallpox or whatever it is that you get a vaccine for, your body suddenly has that active immunity that's in its memory now, and it doesn't have to actually get sick in order to do that. Which vaccines have saved many, many lives over the course of the last century or so. It's a very good thing. Now, a word on treating diseases while we're talking about diseases and such. Usually, when you get sick and say you go to the doctor and get some medicine or something, a lot of times, actually more often than not, there's not really a whole lot that we can do to really fight the disease. We usually just treat the symptoms of the disease. So say you have a high fever, that high heat could actually potentially damage your tissues, so you might take some medicine to lower your fever. That's not really doing anything to fight the pathogens inside you. It's just kind of taking down the fever temperature so that you don't hurt yourself. So a lot of times we actually don't fight the illness itself. We just treat the symptoms because it makes us feel better. And sometimes it can actually protect us and keep us more healthy. But just a word on that. Sometimes it's actually more useful to not take medicine. In some cases, I'm not going to be Mr. Doctor here and tell you when and when not to do this. But sometimes it's more useful not to take the medicine because, like we said, those symptoms like the fever or the cough or the runny nose or whatever are actually your body's response, and it's your body fighting the disease. So if you suppress that and you don't let your body do that, your body can't always fight the disease as well. Sometimes it's necessary to do that, and that's fine, but just sometimes it's good to be wise about it. Now, antibiotics. Many of you who have been sick have gone to the doctor and gotten antibiotics. Just so you know what that is, antibiotics are drugs that fight bacteria. They don't really work against viruses. In fact, there actually aren't a whole lot of drugs that work against viruses. But antibiotics work against bacteria, so they only work for certain diseases. It's kind of funny, having studied biology and a little bit of health and such, you hear people saying, oh, I want to get an antibiotic for my cold or for my flu, but those are caused by viruses, not bacteria, so antibiotics don't actually work for those. Yeah, but just so you know what they are, they work against bacterial infections. Okay, that is all that I have for this lesson right here. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know, and I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you are doing well and staying healthy. Keep your immune system strong. All right, take care.